This is episode 275 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, very busy week. Legislation starting to really move. This is when the committee hearings really ramp up, and bills that you think are going to maybe pass wind up scooting through the whole legislative process in short order, and the chaff get left behind, so to speak. So it's
or the opposite, where things that you really hope were chaff get actually passed, and that's something that could actually do some good for the state goes the other way. So yeah, it goes both ways. But yes, things are definitely moving up in Santa Fe.
But we will talk about that a little bit later because, as is usually the case, there's lots of COVID-related information to relay in this past week. Most notably, the red, yellow, green rubric, which is dominating the virus spread and the way that the state measures it. We are moving in the right direction. So things are looking up, if you will. And we have restaurants opening in a number of counties that have gone into the yellow. Some of those include Taos, we have Grant County, we have Curry County, Santa Fe County, Doña Ana County, Bernalillo County, and Sandoval County, among the kind of major counties that are now in yellow for the first time in a while. So some good news there, and hopefully, for the sake of these restaurants and restaurant owners, we don't get that whipsaw effect where we have a little blip and things go sideways and suddenly restaurants that were open can't be open, and we get that effect where people are being brought in and laid off, and food is getting brought in and possibly spoiling or whatever.
Yeah, or they give it away. Yeah, and I talked to a couple of restaurateurs over the weekend, and yes, they are very happy to be open. One of them relayed to me that he was within a couple months of having to call it quits for his restaurant, and so he's very pleased. But to your point is, it costs some money to start back up. You got to lay in supplies, as it were. You got to buy all the food ahead of time, and you just don't buy it for a day at a time. And so, yes, they need some sustained time to operate for this to be effective for them, because if you have to open and shut, it may, in some cases, be actually worse than if you never open at all. But optimistic, the numbers are looking good. They keep coming down. So, yes, keep our fingers crossed that this will be something that's sustainable, and not just restaurants, for small business in general that have really been hit hard and weren't able to be open through the worst of the COVID crisis. Yes, they're open now, and hopefully they'll stay that way for a while.
No doubt about it. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that heard from some friends in San Juan County. Of course, that's Farmington area, Four Corners. They were none too pleased that they came in at 5.01% on the positivity.
There's no rounding?
No rounding.
Let's go talk to the professor. Maybe he'll round up, because we attended class really good during the school year. Not the case, huh?
No. So, whether this test positivity measuring stick is really the cat's meow or not, I think is very much open to discussion. But 5.01% keeping your restaurants closed, very unfortunate for the folks back up in San Juan County. Hopefully they and other counties move in the right direction, and we can all get into the yellow, and someday over the rainbow into the green.
And what happens after green? Can we start planning for that? Or is that just, we can't imagine a world without New Mexico health orders?
Well, I can imagine a world without them.
But you're not the problem. Is that what you're
yeah,
alluding to?
yeah. It largely involves not our governor too, but uh, the mayor, Tim Keller, mayor of Albuquerque, says we can't expect to go green until the summertime here in Albuquerque, which is definitely a concern. Just and it's not that there are necessarily that many big benefits. You get a little more opening of restaurants, a little more opening of certain other businesses, but yes, the governor has said in a recent press conference that Green Plus would be her whatever beyond green is. I don't know what that means, but presumably it means you can bowl at a bowling alley, you can watch a movie at a movie theater, you can take your kids to Cliff's
I was going
amusement
to
park.
say ride a roller coaster.
You can play laser tag or paintball at Hinkle Family Fun Center, and maybe you can do some other things that you cannot do even under the green standard. So some good news there. We're all playing along because, well, we have to until either the legislature is able to wrest some power away from this governor or this governor rides off into the sunset or something happens. So she could change her mind at any time too. And she's done that on numerous occasions throughout this whole situation. But we'll celebrate moving into the yellow, at least in a lot of the major metro areas of our state, but we're not going to get carried away. Yellow is still extremely restrictive in terms of how we're all living our lives.
Yeah, and then the other thing is that everyone seems, and pardon the pun, to double down on masks. You were supposed to wear none, then one, then two.
Literally doubling down.
Literally, not just figuratively. Yeah, the other thing is maybe see a little more common sense mask rules. I've been looking for that for a long time. Like if you're exercising away from people, out on the trail, so to speak, maybe that would be a good thing. And I think maybe a little bit more talk about that aspect of the active population as opposed to everyone sitting at home, maybe getting out in this wonderful New Mexico climate that we enjoy. Although today it's a little chilly, I will say that. But immune systems are wonderful things, and when you get out and get to moving, they tend to work a little better. And let's not forget that still is a part of overcoming not only this virus but any germ or virus that's out there. So,
no doubt about it. And kind of a side note, but a factor relating to this red, yellow, green situation. You've seen teachers protesting, saying, that they don't want to be in the classrooms teaching until we are in the green. Of course, a couple weeks ago, you and I talked at some length about the CDC director, and this is Biden's person. This is somebody that Joe Biden approved for this position.
This isn't a Trump holdover.
Yes, not a Trump holdover. Her name's Rochelle Walensky. She had said that teachers should be in the classrooms right away. There was a statement made in that regard, and that regardless of the vaccines or vaccination, she did say that. And when we talk about following the science, certainly COVID-19 has been a great illustrator of the way science is politicized, and I think nowhere has science been as politicized in the United States as with regard to opening the schools and getting kids back into the classrooms. And of course, we've lagged dramatically behind other nations in this regard. The CDC director, Biden's CDC director, said we should be back in the classroom, but now the actual guidelines come out, and they quite frankly are clearly politically managed by the Biden administration, which is much more inclined to pay attention to what the teachers unions have to say than what the scientists have to say.
Yeah, and this is facetious. I need the next comment is sarcasm. As long as COVID is not occurred anywhere on earth for 6 to 9 months. Then we're ready to open up the schools and go back to in-person learning. Other than that, it's Zoom for the teachers union. And, not just New Mexico. This is in many, many places that have a strong teachers union. And you know what? I don't know. Is there a place in the U.S. that has a weak teachers union? I'm not
Oh, yeah.
sure. Okay, where is that? I'm not sure.
Well, actually, believe it or not, there are a handful of states, and I don't know them offhand, but Arizona, I believe, is one of them, as well as the state of Virginia. And it's ironic that, and I think Virginia is changing rather rapidly, but those were two of the states that up until recently did not allow public union bargaining, public sector bargaining. They didn't have public employees unions. Now, that doesn't mean that teachers still don't have the power to engage politically in the system and unified political action, but and they did that in Arizona. Was that a year or two ago in the summertime when they had those big walkouts or early school year time? And they certainly, Virginia is changing dramatically, and I think they actually changed their law. But yes, teachers have a very significant amount of goodwill in our society, and when they apply that force together politically, even in the absence of a union, they can get what they want a lot of times.
Well, and the other thing is and we see it in Albuquerque, Santa Fe, Las Cruces, some of the larger school districts. The teachers union have done a very good job of having school board members elected that see things completely their way, and so that's the other issue. Whereas based on my limited knowledge, it seems like places like Southeast New Mexico have a little more balanced school boards, a little maybe less explicit just power with the teachers unions, and they're more likely to open sooner. Although Southeast New Mexico is not in the yellow right now, but they're in the red. But there's still, I think, more of just what I read in the paper and in the comments I hear from principals and superintendents is they're more likely to want to get kids back in the school in-person learning than we hear are in North and North Central New Mexico.
Well, that would be because, as we stated at the outset, the unionization and the power of those unions has a much more significant role to play than the spread of the virus or any other factors. And I'm going to post this in the show notes, but there is a nice article from Reasons, Matt Welch. CDC's new reopening guidance will keep schools closed in the fall. And we'll talk about that in just a second as we shift the discussion to here in New Mexico. But the CDC's science-based reopening guidance includes 5 key considerations: mask wearing, social distancing, hand washing, cleaning, contact tracing. Those are the 5. They say they're going to prioritize the first 2. But one of the social distancing aspects is that they want kids to be socially distanced at least 6 feet. Now that, we have these differing ways of measuring school occupancy, for example, or restaurant occupancy at 25%.
Yeah, it could be fire code or, and if it is this everything 6 feet from everyone else, these percentages don't mean very much. The geometry changes very quickly.
6 feet between each individual student, you wind up dramatically reducing your ability to not just teach, but also fit students into a classroom. So it's going to be very interesting. As we're going to discuss in a second, like I said, we have schools in New Mexico. February 8th was the day the governor said she wanted kids back into the classroom. And whether that was a fully baked or half-baked or barely even a quarter-baked concept is up for debate.
Or easy baked. Remember, it cooked in an oven with a 100-watt light bulb. Maybe it wasn't that baked at all.
I love the easy baked oven.
Nothing like a raw cake.
I'm not afraid to say it. So the Albuquerque Journal talks about the districts. We have 89 districts in the state of New Mexico, and we're tracking them at airsofenchantment.com. We're trying to keep a tab on some of the bigger districts, because 89 is a lot of folks to track, but some of those districts only have 89 people in the districts or
Right.
thereabouts. So we've been trying to look at some of the bigger districts, but 47 of the 89 are open for hybrid at the elementary school level. So of course the younger kids. 41 of the districts have secondary students on campus through mixed learning approach as well. The mixed learning approach as well. So hybrid, which does mean, you get to open up a little more space in the schools. But, while we applaud those districts that have been able to get back into in-person teaching, even at a hybrid level, of course, APS and Santa Fe have both not. No surprise there that those are some of the most union-intensive places around our state. And I think I'll speak for the Guessing family, which is homeschooled this year and never once regretted it. We made the right decision, and I encourage people who have the flexibility and the means to do so, that is a good option, especially, now we are looking forward to next August. And with these CDC guidelines, that seems to be pointing to the continuation of the hybrid model, even when kids go back to school. And maybe that's at best. We could be dealing with new strains of the virus. We could see an uptick or upsurge again. Who knows? But it's a very challenging situation for families, no doubt about it.
Yeah, and Paul, I was thinking a lot about this, and I always try not to make it about me with regard to this, but I was just thinking back to, late elementary school, middle school, junior high, whatever we called it into there, with regard to math in particular. There were certain things that as you learn math, it was very important. It would take sometimes several days for something to really kick in. And if you're in school one day and then you're on distance learning the next and flipping around, it just would seem like, and not just me. I think I'm maybe not unique. That could be an issue. So that's the other thing with regard to this quote hybrid model.
That was just you, Wally.
No,
Just
I
you.
I was always in the back because I'd talk if I was bored. But the
You
idea,
talk? No way.
Yeah.
I'm shocked.
It happened. It's true. You know what, Paul? I like to tease myself and say I suffer from painful shyness, but I overcome it one day at a time. So, but this whole issue, why this is so critically important is that we weren't really knocking it out of the park when it came to learning and achievement in New Mexico anyway. And this is certainly the two things that have maybe two or three that have suffered the most. I would put bowling alleys, then they were okay. Maybe Cliffs Amusement Park, Lobo men's basketball, and public education. The students in public education, they are at huge disadvantage. And man, I hope we can get to something that's more than just the hybrid model sooner instead of later.
No doubt about it. Well, there's still more to discuss in the area of education, and that is finally that the state of New Mexico has asked yet again to be waived out of standardized reading, math, and science testing for a second year in a row, citing difficulties stemming from the pandemic. Now, we want to be as generous as possible here to the
and we'll say yes.
bureaucrats.
There are difficulties from the pandemic. We can without question there are.
Now, I will also say that going back not just to the Susana Martinez administration, and I think it's fair to say that Martinez, a big part of her education agenda was standardized testing and ranking schools and teachers even.
Yeah, and giving a school a grade,
right.
which...
Right. Yeah, it's, a lot of that kind of data was involved in Martinez's model. Now, it is worth noting that school rating is different from teacher rating, and that schools were part of Martinez's model. Believe it or not, the teacher rating system was actually an Obama administration proposal, and Obama had his own education ideas that maybe were joined with Martinez's, but from a free market perspective, weren't necessarily sensible. Now, so we've never been at the Rio Grande Foundation a huge proponent of standardized testing. We weren't super excited about it when Martinez was doing it. We support school choice. We think that parents and students can best appreciate and analyze for themselves whether a particular school or educational model is working out for them. But you need school choice. You need some kind of mechanism for giving parents and students the means of actually choosing a school that makes sense for them, or a school model. And hybrid learning could be the one that makes sense for them. And done right, it can actually work. Same with virtual learning. But the problem is the monopoly government school system. And I do think it is very concerning that we're looking at skipping standardized testing for another year, as we know the kids are not doing particularly well in this new model of virtual learning, hybrid learning, whatever. But just how bad is it? It's very frustrating to say that we may have a second year of no results there. And
yeah, and Paul. I've always been relatively sympathetic to testing in general. I think it's a good thing. These standardized tests are a good thing. Believe me, I certainly understand that you can overdo it and say that's the only measure upon which you judge how things are going. But, with regard to the standardized tests, how people do on those correlates very closely to other standardized tests like the ACT and the SAT, which until recently were really highly used to grant college admission. It seems like that's maybe a little bit more up in the air. But the other issue is that I think now, yes, we need this to know where we are. And you know what? If there's ever a time where you say, okay, this is not blaming the students or blaming the teachers, it's the system they were put into because of COVID, I think it's helpful to know where we are. Because, it's interesting. I was thinking, we have grand press conferences by governors across the country every week or two talking about COVID. Well, as we come out of this, there's other things that will need attention. And, without some sort of a measurement, it's like, okay, yeah, we really fell behind in our learning achievement during this COVID, and now we're going to keep on that until we recover. How are you going to do that without some sort of standardized test? I don't know what the answer is if it's not testing of some kind, because otherwise, it reminds me of the bad line from Caddyshack. If you don't,
there were no bad lines.
If you don't keep score, how do you judge yourself against other golfers? And he said, by height. Well, being a tall person, I thought that's a fair enough way to do it. I don't think that's the way we want to be judging our teachers and our students in public schools. I think standardized testing beats height every time. But if we don't do testing, then what?
Totally agree with you. Yes, it can be used effectively. It can be ineffective and overdone. But right now, in this particular situation, not doing the testing is very problematic. And I wanted to speak briefly. You mentioned UNM and NMSU, especially their athletic departments. A news report came out from the Albuquerque Journal that UNM athletics is predicting a shortfall of $13.8 million for the latest fiscal year, which ends on June the 30th. That's in addition to the $1.6 million deficit the department started the fiscal year with. Now, not going to say I told you so, not you, but boy, Rio Grande Foundation took a lot of heat for arguing that maybe the Lobos and Aggies, just football teams, should be merged. But man, the always costly, always questionable finances of major college athletics around the country and here in New Mexico really cratered in an epic fashion during COVID-19. And we have a lot of sympathy for these teams that have been playing on the road for the entire season with no fans, very difficult conditions.
40 days and 40 nights wandering in the desert, or 40 years wandering in the desert is what came to mind for me. But yeah, we feel a lot of sympathy for them. But man, without fans and without anything happening in New Mexico, the money still was spent in large numbers.
Yeah, in football games, a lot of stadiums were fill at least close to half capacity around the country. Certainly
Well,
not
which
here
is
in New
good for the
Mexico.
Lobos and the Aggies, not to be glib about it. In a regular year, that's pretty good. Truthfully, I mean,
You're right. You're right.
let's face it.
Yeah, but playing in front of zero fans, including college basketball, which of course nobody's playing in front of fans, and the pit has been shut down completely. Will be for the entire season. They're doing vaccinations there rather than playing basketball. All right, Wally, and I guess this is sort of COVID related. The whole world is COVID related, really, at this point, because no issue has dominated not just our politics, but our lives for as long as that particular issue. We're getting close to halfway through the legislative session, and I'm going to ask you a very difficult question, Wally. Have you taken the time as a good citizen to either watch a webcast or participate in a committee hearing?
Participate, no. Watch, yes. And
It's a start.
yeah,
We'll take it.
and they can be pretty painful to. It's one of those. Watching the sausage of laws being made is not for the faint of heart sometimes. And, a lot of times there's very minute points to be addressed. And sometimes you just get, frankly, people that don't know what they're talking about talking to other people that don't know what they're talking about. And it can be extremely frustrating. But yeah, I've watched some. I think that, they're catching on to the Zoom a little bit, and they're starting to get the hang of that. Luckily, we haven't had anybody that has had the little kitty cat overlay over their face to where they've testified or been a legislator as a cat. That's been good. And so, yeah, I think you can follow along and see what's going on. One of the ones I actually watched a bit this morning is on liquor license reform with regard to restaurants. And man, this is a complicated issue. I mean, and this thing has been going on. I watched a little bit, then I had a half-hour call, then I watched about another hour, then I went and I was like, oh, I might go get a quick workout in, get it a quick workout. Came back, it's still on, and I'm not saying they're not making progress, but it doesn't happen quickly. So sometimes on certain issues, you have to want it and want it bad to keep up with this. And so, maybe not this is not a plug necessarily for lobbyists, but, from a business point of view, a lot of times it's difficult for a business person to monitor this for hours and hours and hours. And a lot of times they use trade associations and others to keep up with things because it is very difficult. It's very important to you as a business person a lot of times, but it's tough to do it on your own. And so that's as close as I'll get to the pro lobbyist comment. But, after watching this today and several iterations going on and on and on, it's like, yeah, this is something, boy, it's tough to do it yourself necessarily, but it will impact you.
Well, that's why you pay a lobbyist to do that, so you don't have to. And there's a lot of things, whether it's cooking or some other job that you are not good at or find distasteful, and you pay somebody else to do it. And that being said, here at the Rio Grande Foundation, we can only do so much. We've been doing a lot of tracking of bills, but we did the good, the bad, and the ugly. We looked at these, and I was on that liquor bill as well, and also over the weekend. Things are really starting to hit their whole stride when they're doing Saturday committee hearings. So on Saturday morning, there was a discussion in the Senate Conservation Committee over whether the Energy Transition Act should be amended in certain ways that not the way we want it amended, but you got a lot of good Democrat rhetoric talking about how the Energy Transition Act is a huge giveaway to PNM, which indeed we said at the time, and PRC Commissioner Fishman was one of the expert witnesses, and he actually said, we said all this at the time. This was one of our main concerns about the bill, but they still supported it because of, mostly because they all support going into green energy, so to speak, renewables. Then after that, there was discussion of the fracking ban, which did pass out of its first committee, Antoinette Cedillo Lopez, SB 149, I believe. And there then later on was a House committee discussion of P&M, again, back to utilities, but this was in the House, and they have a bill that's still moving. This also passed its committee, which would allow P&M or call for P&M to offer, among other things, lower utility rates to people of lesser means. And we can argue about
so-called socialized utility rate
Yes.
making is what it was called academically. I'm sure there's some political correctness violation by even calling it that, but that's
HB 206 was the bill, and it did move forward in the House Consumer and Public Affairs Committee. Yeah, you're right. It's and whether you think that's a great idea or not, it's one thing for the government to track your incomes and various other things that you have, but it's another
for your utility
bill. Yeah, and not Enchant Energy. Sorry, wrong. El Paso or Excel Energy. Sorry, so many mergers and they're all changing their names, but Excel testified to that effect that, hey, we just don't have the resources to try to figure out whether people should be given these what amounts to subsidized rates. And so we testified against that first and foremost because Energy Transition Act, if you're driving up the rates of your utilities, maybe you should focus on that first rather than worrying about providing new government programs for subsidized electricity rates.
Yeah, and the further we get down that rabbit hole, just consider how much Google and Facebook know about people that are users of those products, which are many, many people in America. Think if the utility has to have that. Now, the thought did occur, maybe Google and Facebook should be operating the utilities. They already have all this data, though. They know who's worthy and who's not worthy. But yeah, that's a lot of temptation, as it were. That's a lot of information to give to any company, across the board. And it's interesting. Privacy's a occasionally valued thing in our American society. Maybe in this case, not so much, but is it really worth it? Mm-hmm. And are there better ways to do it? There are already things out there, and I'm sure they talked about this, LIHEAP, low income heating assistance program, other things that are designed to take care of these things without necessarily completely changing how we make the rate making process in America might be a better way to go. So,
yeah. And just to bring it back, because we did kind of jump into the bills themselves, and there's many bad bills, mostly bad ones, a few good ones. But the good thing is, while I was listening to testimony on these and other bills in their committees, I was helping my lovely wife in a pre-Valentine's Day cleaning of the garage. So I wasn't, when you go up to Santa Fe, aside from the hour you spend in a car each way from Albuquerque, let alone if you're from Hobbs, I mean, you're really bought into a day and a half.
Yeah, or Silver City or Lordsburg, heaven forbid.
But you can do other things that are far more productive. So I'm doing the good of the remote testimony. So I was doing productive things like cleaning the garage while listening to testimony. And you can work out while you are listening to testimony as well. The webcast is better to do. You have to get a Zoom link and get into the meeting. I don't recommend doing that while you're working out, but you can listen to.
Well, you can listen on Zoom on your phone, and it works quite well.
But testifying,
no, I would recommend against that.
Although some of the people testifying in these meetings clearly were kind of just hanging out in their houses and not I think Zoom etiquette, they get into a whole different talking point there. Do you have to don the suit and tie for that kind of thing? Now. That's kind of the good stuff. And there are good things. And I do think that remote testimony is a worthwhile addition to the legislative tool kit, because especially for people from outside the kind of central New Mexico area, that those people should be able to render testimony in these committee hearings more easily than they are now. So that is the good stuff. The bad news is transparency, the ability for people to engage in the process without necessarily being in a committee hearing. You've got a very complicated bill like liquor reform. The ability to meet in the hallway and discuss concerns, talk about those things, not so much off the record, but just have those kind of candid conversations in private is a little more challenging. Yeah, I mean, a legislator may or may not return your text, return your phone call, return whatever message or email you're trying to get to them. But if you stand around in the roundhouse long enough in a normal session, you will be able to track down a relevant legislator.
Yeah, and I've seen during in-person legislative sessions where the legislators point at two opposing parties and they say, you know what? Why don't you two go talk to each other and then come back with something that you both might work on? I'm not saying that sort of thing doesn't happen. There are people that talk on Zoom and have each other's cell phones, but yeah, that's one of the things that's probably not as easy to do in this Zoom environment, is to get people working together towards a compromise, because it's so hard to get in touch with them if you're not in person.
Yeah, and the ugly aspect, because we have to have good, bad, and ugly.
I was thinking that. So.
The ugly is, of course, with the numbers in the legislature, with the progressive bent in the legislature, are they going to be pulling some of their punches a little bit and maybe not going down the full progressive path because the public is less able to address some of the issues that they are dealing with? And we have businesses that are already saddled by the COVID-19 pandemic and the reaction to it and the policies and closures, and that they're trying to now impose, the legislature is, mandatory paid sick leave. You've got minimum wage proposals. You've got all kinds of business proposals that could negatively impact the ability of these businesses to do what they do. You do have some good things as well, some tax considerations and some other COVID-related policies. But ultimately, in a progressive legislature where they dominate and are largely acting behind closed doors, are we going to get it good and hard, or is it going to be, are they going to pull their punches a little bit because of the unusual conditions?
Yeah.
We don't know.
Yeah, we do not know. And Paul, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party has not been very good at pulling punches ever at any legislative body that I've seen. But we have a time right now that is unique. So they're doing things that are supporting businesses that are teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. And so if you're going to be doing those things and then turning around and doing things that are going to make it much more difficult and costly for businesses to recover, what really message are you sending? That all good and all bad goes through state government? I don't know if that's the right message. And again, is that the most effective way to help businesses that have really been hurt by the management policies of COVID-19 here in the state? So yeah, but I've not seen punches pulled. This could be a case, and you never do know. You really don't know whose rhetoric and their voting is sometimes a little bit different. Sometimes people come in very hot with regard to one left or right on an issue, but then will moderate in their voting. We'll have to see. But this is a very unique session in that there's many dollars are being looked at putting state money towards the benefit of businesses that are on the verge of failing, and then to turn around in the same session and do things that are going to make it harder for them to recover and maybe make it more likely that they fail. That doesn't seem like that's very good public policy as well.
Yeah, and we mentioned briefly SB 149. It passed Senate Conservation Committee on a 5-4 vote. I would still lump this bill into the long shot category. There's still enough Democrats that like the money that the oil and gas industry produces for the state and the funding it provides for education and whatnot, especially in the pandemic situation, that they're not inclined to really totally destroy New Mexico's economy. Uh, According to Albuquerque Journal article about the legislation, the pause on new permits would cost New Mexico $1.7 billion to $3.8 billion a year in revenue through 2025, according to the legislature's chief economist. That would be, in a budget of $7.4 billion annually, a hit of $1.7 to $3.8 billion a year. It's I don't even know what they would do in terms of funding government. You would just see, you can't raise taxes high enough to make up for all that.
No, what would we do? And Dandy Don Meredith, God rest his soul, former
Dallas Cowboy
quarterback, TV announcer, and Santa Fe resident, used to sing, "Turn out the lights, the party's over." I think that's what it would mean. But, the fact that we're talking about this at the federal level, we're talking about it at the state level, there is a lot of fiscal uncertainty, a lot of revenue uncertainty in the state of New Mexico. And so, boy, I can't imagine this passing the legislature. Hopefully cooler heads would prevail. But it's one of those things, you play around, if you're a 10-year-old kid and you play with matches, sometimes you get burned. If it makes it through enough committees and makes it on the floor and people vote for it, it could become law. And so I don't think it will, but it's certainly not a good sign. And certainly makes people in the industry nervous. And you know who else it makes nervous, Paul, is people that rely on state programs that are funded from the general fund. It makes a lot of them very nervous. Now, they're a lot of times less likely to come out publicly because who wants to be for the big bad oil and gas people? But a lot of people who benefit from the dollars are well aware of where they come from.
Now, Wally, you alluded to the cold weather we've experienced, and on Saturday night, my partying involved posting a screenshot of PNM's renewable energy tracker. So this was 9:40 p.m. I posted on Twitter.
What was the round number of renewables that were being produced?
So just for the record, 9:40, it was getting started in terms of the cold weather kicking in, and I think
the big wind, right?
Yeah, the wind. It hadn't quite started snowing at that point, but according to PNM's renewable tracker, less than 5% of the electricity generated at that particular time was from renewable sources. And this is a problem. And we're looking at Texas right now. This is an article from the Dallas Morning News. The headline is "Frozen Wind Turbines, Soaring Spot Electricity Prices, How the Arctic Freeze is Roiling Texas's Energy Market." Now, I would say that in many respects, Texas has done a lot right in its electricity system, but it is also heavily reliant on wind power, which has its challenges, especially when, according to this article, it says the power crunch is being compounded by a lack of wind generation, with output more than halving to 4.2 gigawatts. Not the one in Back to the Future, but it was reduced by more than half, down to 4.2 gigawatts was wind. It says wind turbines may freeze in bitterly cold weather, reducing efficiency, and blades can ultimately stop spinning.
And when it's too windy, you have to shut them down. It's one of those, you need wind for windmills to work, obviously, but there comes a point at which it's dangerous to operate them. And, that's one thing we don't have is ice storms in New Mexico very much. But boy, Texas has them. And it's not surprising. 5% renewable. And where do the other 95% come from, Paul? Let's think. Nuclear? Yeah. Coal? Yeah. Natural gas? Yeah. A little hydro? Yeah, a little bit. Not much, but a little bit. Batteries? No, not really. Not so much. Those don't. Right now the batteries that are in the system are very short term. So yeah, there's a lot more rhetoric as it were. There's a lot more wishful thinking with regard to the United States renewable plan that has necessarily been proven anywhere else in the world. And so we will have to see. And when the lights go out and when the power goes out during extreme weather conditions, that makes it all the worse. It's one of those, it's never good in a modern society. It's never good. But boy, if it's cold and, if it's 0 or below, that can make it really tough. And the other side's true too. If it's 90 degrees and above and hot and you don't have air conditioning, some people like me will whine a lot, but probably be okay. But there are a lot of people that are elderly. If you're living in a place where it's above 90 and you don't have air conditioning, it can be a true life or death situation. So
you got it. And I had an article that has been posted at heirsoфenchantment.com. It originally appeared at National Review's website. The title was Hurting the Economy Without Helping the Climate. We've got this inside out. And the general point that I made in this piece is that a lot of what we are doing, and by we, I mean the federal government, the Biden administration, with not allowing permits on federal lands for oil and gas, of course, state policies, both past and present, as well as future, here in New Mexico and around the country, all of which are geared towards some variation of green energy and making us less CO2 intensive as a state or nation. It's really not going to work out very well, not just because we're hindering our own economy, spending a lot of money that we don't really have for feel-good policies that aren't necessarily going to work, but when China is massively expanding its coal production, coal burning power plant production, you're going to face a situation where any gains made by the United States are swamped by China. And I think we talked about this briefly. I turned it into a full article. Article I cited from Voice of America noted that China put 38.4 gigawatts of new coal-fired power capacity into generation in 2020, more than 3 times the amount built elsewhere around the world and potentially undermining its short-term climate goals.
Potentially?
Potentially, yes.
Potentially. It could happen.
It could. Well, you got to quote the article in full. You can't just
no.
pick and
I was
choose.
just like, that was, potentially, maybe.
Well, that is if they have climate
goals.
goals.
Yeah, do they? Well, maybe their climate goals are to produce more carbon dioxide. We don't know. But yes, I would think that if they have any reduction goals, putting in that much coal-fired generation is probably not going to help them get there.
Yeah, and certainly China is a developing country. They certainly have a right to develop their economy. But if Biden is serious, and if environmentalists are serious about addressing CO2 emissions, it would behoove them to figure out ways to both help China directly engage with less CO2 intensive electricity and just general development. Could be as simple as natural gas. I know that we are now exporting liquefied natural gas, and China is probably the number one market for that, and that's a good thing. It's much better than coal, but certainly there's got to be some solutions out there that if China is going to do anything, if we're going to be doing anything about this supposed global problem of CO2 emissions and climate change, it's going to require everybody. And China is obviously not pulling its weight, so to speak. They're pulling the weight the other direction.
Right.
While we have the full weight of the U.S. government and states attempting to push in the opposite direction. It's not going to work.
Well, the United States Department of Energy has invested hundreds of millions of dollars in carbon capture technology, various programs across the country, including a couple that the city of Farmington and Enchant Energy could be beneficiaries of in terms of how to store carbon dioxide in saline aquifers in the San Juan Basin, as well as development funds. And one of the things that's talked about in those programs is that not only are these programs that can benefit the energy market, the consumers, the industry in America, but in terms of paving the way, showing other countries how to do that, it's tough to imagine. The quote from the movie The Graduate. There's a great future in plastics. Think about it. Will you think about it? Yes, I will. Plastics. Well, in the modern energy economy, it's batteries. But can we make enough batteries to do everything that we need batteries to do? And right now, it's looking like it's a little shaky. And believe me, I know that technology marches ever forward. But, the grand just quantum leap in batteries has not occurred. The batteries of today they use lithium. They're better than the lead acid batteries of old, but they're not that much better. And so it's one of those things. And we've also seen in places like Germany that put windmills in a bunch of plains and canyons where the wind didn't blow, and they've had their issues with regard to that. That you run into the reality of either the economics or the physics. And that's something that we need to really strongly address as a country. And I'm not sure that we've gotten serious about doing that yet. Whether we're serious about reducing carbon or whether it's just, hey, let's see how much renewables we can put in. We'll see what happens there. I'm not sure what the answer is on either one of those.
Yeah. And like 100 years ago, when there was a lot of push behind electric vehicles, and there was no determination yet that it was gasoline-powered vehicles that were going to carry the day. The environmental problem being dealt with 100 years ago, however, was horse manure on the roads, and any solution that eliminated that problem probably looked pretty darn good 100 years ago. As I'm sure to environmentalists' eyes, the idea of electric vehicles, which don't emit anything directly, although you have to get the electricity from somewhere, then you have to get the batteries and everything that's put into those. That large-scale deployment will certainly have its negative repercussions for the environment and challenges and whatnot, but I think there's a certain element of the population that just doesn't care or is willing to ignore any of those negatives. So
yeah, although that is maybe starting to change a little bit. California in particular has what I euphemistically like to call electricity appreciation days, where they turn off the power and keep raising the rates on you. And sooner or later, if the power gets turned off enough or the rates go high enough, you really start to notice it. And again, kind of coming full circle with energy back to what's going on in Santa Fe. Yeah, these issues right now are all very hypothetical, but they will, for better or worse, really come into focus as being things that really do impact New Mexicans on a daily basis, depending on what gets decided.
No doubt about it. All right, we have one final bill to discuss and one other issue related to that. HB4, the New Mexico Civil Rights Act. This is a pretty ambitious piece of legislation. Speaker Egolf is one of the sponsors. And, of course, it relates to crime issues. It relates to police treatment of citizens, et cetera. At least it's supposed to. I can't go into all of the different aspects of this law, but basically, the idea is, and we discussed this with Commissioner Dave Heil from Sandoval County a few weeks ago, right as the session was kicking off, because a lot of local government folks have a lot of heartburn about this New Mexico Civil Rights Act. Analysts say that it's going to cost taxpayers $20 million every single year. And if basically and it's worth reading Errors of Enchantment to get a grasp on exactly what is potentially going to happen under this bill if it moves forward and passed into law. The statement that I think really summarizes things, is increasing the ability to litigate against law enforcement is not going to improve policing in New Mexico. If we were doing something with those $20 million or whatever amount of money that the state and local governments would be on the hook for, if that was directly going to improve the ability to hire more qualified police officers, to increase safety, to improve interactions between police and civilians, then that would be a very serious issue to discuss. But I just don't see anything in HB4 that is going to actually do what New Mexicans, especially here in Albuquerque, really want, which is to have a safer, less crime situation in their community.
Yes, I agree with you. You know, this is a version of the cancel the police sort of thing. It's like, let's make the rules of engagement so difficult that either the policemen themselves, because they lack any legal protection, and you know everything they do would be put them subject to lawsuit, or the cities and counties and municipalities that they work for are exposed to such severe liabilities that they say, forget it, just, you know, go drive around, just don't get into trouble, don't cost us money. I don't think that that's in the best interests in of, you know, the state of New Mexico and its cities, but there is a lot of momentum going in that other direction. The problem is that we've seen in places like Minnesota where the police have gone away. With less police, you don't get less crime. The police aren't causing the crime. You know, that is the point. And so, talk about a complicated issue, Paul. I did not watch any hearings on that, but just reading some of the briefing papers on that, this is an extremely complicated issue with lots and lots of moving pieces and parts. And I don't know. I certainly don't think this is in a position where this would be a good thing to pass at this point, based on what I've read. But man, the risk to everyday New Mexicans of this is tremendous.
No doubt about it. All right. Final issue. Channel 7 KOAT recently did an excellent story dealing problems, speaking of crime, with the court-ordered agreement with the Department of Justice that the city of Albuquerque has been under for several years now. That agreement has also cost Albuquerque taxpayers $20 million. Magical number there.
And has it helped crime?
No, it has not.
It might have made it well, and this is a good example. Yes,
right. In
putting
fact,
more rules on the police,
mm-hmm.
Does that reduce crime? Maybe it does not.
Yeah, the money went for training, equipment, staffing, and a court-ordered, court-appointed monitor. While it is hard to prove causation, violent crime since that DOJ order came down has increased by 53%, which is quite a significant increase in our crime rate. So very, very important. And we all want policing to be better and those interactions to be less violent and respectful of people's rights.
And nothing we're saying says that we're supporting cops that abuse the rules and abuse people and do not follow the law themselves. You know, I know we are not saying that, but we're saying that you can put rules into place to make the police completely ineffective. And I don't know, the results are not all that unpredictable, I think, at this point.
Well, as we write in the analysis of HB4, police in New Mexico do not have what's called qualified immunity. They are not immune from their actions if they do something that is clearly against the law. That is not something that we have offered to police officers in this state. So HB4 dealing with that issue is one approach. The DOJ approach has been another. I would say that one has the makings of being ineffective if it's pushed into law, and the other has proven to be ineffective if in law. And it's not that there's any magic silver bullet to reducing crime. You've got a lot of means that you need to get creative and actually address crime issues. We just have not found it or been willing to kind of embrace it here in the state of New Mexico. So it's no one's saying this is an easy problem to solve. We're just trying to look at ways that seem to not be effective. So thank you for watching and or listening to this episode of Tipping Point, New Mexico. Thank you to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show. Be sure to check us out on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google, your Google
Google
device.
Play.
Yes, Google Play, called Tipping Point, New Mexico. All right. We'll see you next week.